Hello, world, and welcome to my podcast, The Bull, The China Shop, and I. This is a show for everybody who is ready to rock the boat and instigate. Some will call it a rant. I'm calling it an overdue cleansing of what is swept under the rug to make room for better, for bolder, and for braver. My name is Isabella Izzy Tsatsek, and yes, I'm an instigator, but on the side of the angels. Yep, I did steal that line from my second favorite TV show, The West Wing. It is all about the uncomfortable topics and challenges out there in the business world that we all know about, but don't want to talk about, or do we? What we're going to do on this show is to take uncomfortable truths apart and discuss direction we could take going forward to approach these truths for action and impact. So let's open Pandora's box and turn what comes out of it into goodness. My want for this podcast: raise voices, trigger change, and start actions and a movement. So let's get started. I'm grateful that you're here with us. Courage is fire and bullying is smoke. Benjamin Disraeli. When I looked into workplace bullying, I found a couple of very interesting statistics. In 2017, the Workplace Bullying Institute found that 19% of Americans are bullied and another 19% witness it. 61% of Americans are aware of abusive conduct in the workplace. 60.4 million Americans are affected by it. 70% of perpetrators are men. 60% of targets are women. 61% of bullies are bosses. The majority, which would be 63%, operate alone. 29% of targets remain silent about their experiences. 71% of employer reactions are harmful to targets. 60% of co-workers' reactions are harmful to targets. To stop it, 65% of targets lose their original jobs. Thanks for coming on my podcast, Jay.
Wow, those statistics are amazing. Can we just stop there? We're done, right?
I know, we're done. I think we uncovered an uncomfortable truth, but seriously, I'm so happy for you to be on the show, talking about an uncomfortable truth that might also trigger some people, right? I mean, bullying.
Yes.
And bullying in the workplace, though, I mean, how does it show up? Do we call it out? Or even worse, do we actually reward it if the numbers, are right on the back end, like the dollars are coming in? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, right? And I'm glad that you're here to help me to discuss what is happening, why it's happening, and how can we change the conversation for a better outcome. So over to you.
Well, I'm going to interrupt. I'm just jumping in, Isabella, sorry, because I'm so excited about this topic. And I just want to say, you already know this because we had that coffee shop conversation in Las Vegas. I was a bully. In my early 20s, I received a job as a director of interns. And for several summers, I was a director with no training, anywhere from 10 to 20 interns and other staff members. And because I had no tools in my tool belt except fear and intimidation, I bullied people. So this topic is really important to me. One, because I was a bully and I'm super reformed, and now I help leaders be better and help them avoid bullying. And two, I experienced bullying in a large corporate environment. I remember being cursed out 3 times in a year. So I think one reason I'm here, and you already know this, is because the topic is really important to me, both one, as a former and reformed bully, two, as a person who experienced bullying in corporate environments and in nonprofits, and three, as a person who spent the last 15 years working with teams and training managers and really working on that, director, VP, CTO level to help them understand what bullying looks like and how they might be bullies. So I think it's also personally important to you, right? For some reasons?
Yes. Many of them, right? Because what I just said, I mean, most of us have probably gone through bullying, right? In the earlier days.
Yeah.
Right? We experienced bullying during our childhood, right? May it be school, kindergarten, or just amongst friends. And I think what shocked me even more so, like going into the corporate world, that it's alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said as well, it's like also being rewarded, where I'm like, what is going on here? Because I remember when and I wasn't even in the early days, so I've been in corporate at that point for 12 years, fairly high up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did report a case of bullying and actually also the fear of retaliation, I was actually made the target. Like an investigation was started about me on whether I am a mature leader. And then I was actually told that I'm an immature leader and don't understand the bigger picture. So I was like, I was puzzled, absolutely puzzled. And I think the more we talk about it also with other people, there's a rise in bullying. So my question is really, like, how come, right? With gazillion of books and workshops and, TV segments about it, media exposure, we see a rise of bullying. We see a rise of toxic workplace cultures. I mean, what is wrong with that?
That's a good question. I think there are a number of things, and I want to start with a few more statistics to back up what you got from Workplace Bullying Institute.
Please.
Everyone listening, go to Workplace Bullying Institute. Great statistics if you want to talk to this about with your managers and your teams. What we see from Deloitte's 2016 Human Capital Trends Report. I'm saying it wrong. They have a great report. And what we see is that 90% of teams across the world or organizations are reorging to cross-team. So we have a lot more collaboration and teamwork in the US and internationally. At the same time, what we see from a number of studies, including the American Psychological Association, is that few managers actually receive soft skills training. The APA did a study of a little over 1,000 managers, and of those 1,000 managers, only 20% reported receiving soft skills training, and only 8% reported receiving practice. So I think one part of it is that the world is moving towards more cross-teaming and reorging teams based on projects. So it requires a very fluid leader who can work with lots of different people. Then you're working across cultures now because a lot of organizations are more global. There's a lot more remote work. And then managers don't receive soft skills training. So I equate it to this idea, like if you have a great conversation with someone in the break room and then you decide to make them a keynote speaker. I think we assume that because we're all people, managing people is a natural skill. Gallup did a study. They used 25 million data points from their 40 years of research. And Gallup estimates that only 1 in 10 employees actually have the natural skill to lead people. So for me as a trainer, part of what I see is a lack of training. A big part of it is in the US, there is no law. So there's nothing outlining it. There's nothing protecting us from it. So over 30 states now are considering, I think it's called the Healthy Workplace Bill or Workplace Health Bill.
Yes.
It's not passed in any state. So there's not a clear protection for individuals who feel like they're being bullied. And I think another part of it is that it's often the quiet, disenfranchised minority in terms of sexuality, sexual orientation. It's mostly women. It's mostly top down. So there's this huge power dynamic. So I would say lack of training, teaching people how to work with people, more cross-teaming with no leadership training for that. Big thing is there is no law. There's nothing holding anyone accountable in a real way about this. I
want to jump into that because it's like, wow, there's a lot to dive into. And what kind of, big question mark for me, where I'm kind of disagree with you on one piece. And
I thought you would.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, yeah, what do you expect? But it's the training part, right? You see multi-million-dollar or even perhaps billion-dollar investments into training, right? You see coaches and consultants galore. People I talk to, there is massive amounts of training that is pushed out. If it's emerging leaders, getting executives more in line. So here's my question. We have all that training. Is it a matter of what is trained? Is it a matter of the content itself, where it's almost like Pollyanna, we just want to talk about the nice things, but we're not actually putting on a board like this is about bullying. We
Yes.
call it like something different because training is out there.
Yes.
But I'm asking myself, like, who is failing here? Is it the access to it, or is it what we're doing now, like talking about an uncomfortable truth and not trying to like make it all sound positive, because it is not a bloody positive topic.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I do understand, and I don't have the exact statistic. 70%, it's more than 70%, but I'm going to safely say 70% of the budgets for training go towards technical skills, because we have a reverence for technical skills. And especially for Profiles International found that 80% of managers hire for technical skills, especially when it's a hard to fill position. So there is a lot of more soft skills training than ever before. And yet we know that Ken Blanchard companies found that more than 40% of managers receive no training at all. They're just, have that subject matter expert who's plopped into a chair and they're given a team. So I think you're right. It is great that there are many more books and there are many more types of training than there was probably 20 years ago. At the same time, I think that as a reformed bully, the thing that reformed me, one, was the training. And I think the other thing that we need to touch on is that unpacking that power dynamic, so it doesn't feel like it's all on the onus of the victim to say something. What's interesting to me about bullying is that the victim, the target, is worn away emotionally. And then so what we find from WBI is that 82% of targets fail to make a formal complaint because they are rightfully so worn away emotionally and don't have the wherewithal. So I think that organizations need to be responsible for putting structures in place that prevent bullying, and organizations need to be responsible for their HR departments, their culture teams, their managers actively looking out for this behavior and coaching people out of it, and getting rid of toxic people. So I agree with you. I do think that there's a lot more training. There is much more technical reverence than soft skills reverence. Even the term soft skills implies, I think, a lack of respect for that set of skills. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a fair point. And then on the other side, I'm like, why do we always have to come back to a word, right? Then don't call it anything altogether, right? Call it skills.
Yes.
Right? What you said. Mm-hmm. And I wish there would be much more transparency, right? Because you mentioned something about how do companies actually react, right? How often do we see like, oh, it's just, a lapse of judgment. It's, it's a one-off.
Yeah.
And I mean, when is a one-off enough? Is it about the degree of hurt, the degree of impact, the degree of pain someone causes? I mean, it's what I find amazing though, is that bullying is very much linked to management, right? As soon as someone becomes a leader and the more seniors it gets, it even looks, bullying is getting worse, right? And with what I said earlier on, with the perception that brute and bullish behavior is rewarded. Because when you read through a number of articles, it's fascinating that many bullies are actually high-functioning employees. Yes. They're valued, they are supported, almost with a blank check. So my question is, like, how do we go about and calling them out? I mean, think about the statistics I talked about, that the ones that are suffering actually have to then leave are the targets.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I agree with you that it is very complicated. And I agree that it is victim heavy in terms of the the consequences. The statistics from WBI show that, and Harvard Business Review. I can't remember the article. In an article about leaders, what they found was 1/4 of leaders they're actually able to effectively lead the team. 75% of them are in leadership positions, according to HBR, because they were great subject matter experts and individual contributors, but very few of them know how to lead people. I don't want to harp on the training because I think there are other aspects of it. I do think to your question, what do we do? How do we call it out? I think there are a lot of preemptive measures. One thing that organizations can do is adopt a definition or a policy for bullying. And I know we're moving into directions, or you call directions, I might say solutions or next actions. Is SHRM has a great policy that you can just download, although there's no federal policy or no state policy. As an individual organization or an HR team, or even a team leader, maybe you can't give a policy, but you can adopt some of that information from SHRM and WBI, putting that in your onboarding or your training, reviewing it with managers on promotion. That's a great way to start, because part of what's complicated about bullying is that it borrows from other forms of harassment. It could be gender-based, race-based, socioeconomically based. It's an act of power in a lot of ways. So we need to define it in order to call it out.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because yes, I will admit it. My God, full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of laws, but one can say, right, like, oh, I'm German. We love rules. So here's like something I would say against that, which is, we have so many laws and rules and regulations already, and we hardly see them enforced. And to top that, so I'm living in Colorado. It would be interesting to talk about Nevada as well in your view. But for example, Colorado is not known to be a good state for employees, right? Like compared to California, for example.
Yeah.
It is so hard to find an employee lawyer here, to help you get your case heard. I even talked to a couple of lawyer friends of mine who are very well connected, and they couldn't even give me a name to just talk something through.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you're pretty much hosed. Yes, you said federal law, but we know how long it takes, right? It's until you can actually enforce it. It's what I'm struggling with is bullying should be common sense, right? We see it, we should do something about it. I'm not sure if a policy that lives in an onboarding handbook will help it if you're also not putting action, right, as a consequence.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's part of the rub, and this is where we'll get into more data-driven insights, is that bullying can feel like common sense unless we have a clear definition, because part of some of the common factors for a definition from SHRM and WBI and other places is that, first of all, it's repeated behavior. So you can have a toxic situation and it happens once, may not necessarily be bullying if it's not repeated, because the victim is also a target. So bullying is not just about doing something toxic. It's about doing something toxic that is intentional and it targets someone. So the third part is that the perpetrator is trying to do it, and they've looked at this person or these sets of people and said, I am intentionally going to try to do this to you, to target, to have these negative impacts on you. So I feel it's really interesting, because definitely you can have toxic behavior in the workplace if it's not repeated and if it's not targeted. It's toxic, and we have to address it. It may not necessarily be bullying. It may those.
That is interesting. I love what you say there, because what is bullying, right? Because let's not confuse it with the discussions we have on other topics where suddenly everything is considered, a certain insult to whatever. And yes, there is some validity to it, but if we can find top 3 signs of a bully,
Yeah.
what would it be?
Yeah, I would say it's a repeated behavior. I may give you 4. It's a repeated pattern of behavior. The intention is to cause a negative impact on the target, and it's over the course of time. So I think that those are the parts. Like, it's repeated, it's intentional, it's over the course of time. So that's important to. I would say that those parts are important because you can have a person who has a certain work style. We're both predictive index certified, and I know that I have read reports of people's PIs that says aggressive when challenged, assertive, independent, going to push for their own way. If that may be a style that's experienced as bullying, and that person, because it's their style all around, they have that style going down to their direct reports, going across to their colleagues, and going up to the VPs and C-level, it is a style that needs to be managed, not necessarily bullying. So it's a really, I feel like the definition and the policies are important because the other thing that I found, having worked in the entertainment industry and with artists on shows, is that there is a certain way in which you can be in an industry and people are direct and they, are casual with their conversation. Maybe they use F-bombs. And then let's say if I migrated from that industry to somewhere more conservative, if I brought that style with me, it may be a style that I've developed in a different industry. It may be bullying for a different organization. So you see, it's like all of these factors that are important. And I also want to be clear that at the end of the day, it's not the victim's fault, because I know what I say can feel like blaming the victim. It is important to understand that people have different work styles. It's important that we have a policy. And it's also important that organizations frame what's right or wrong for them until we get the law. And so that way I can look at the definition of bullying and say, hey, we know you did that in your other organization years ago, but according to this definition that we talked about in onboarding, that's posted in the HR offices, that we talked to you about when you got promoted to a manager, you were doing these 4 things. So for us, this is bullying. So that's where that policy comes into place. It makes it less subjective. It's like,
I love that. And I couldn't agree more with you, right? Because while you were talking, I'm thinking about so many scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. Also, oh my God, have I come across as a bully? Right?
Have
not
you?
Well,
have you?
Not intentionally, but yes, I'm known for a direct approach, right?
Yes.
If I want something done, I'll get it done. Obviously, oh my God, I think after this, podcast, I will call a couple of my former employees and just check in with them, but they're still talking to me. So I hope nothing was lost there. But
yes.
I mean, and here's what I love about this conversation, that we talk about perpetrators, right? And something that, although I read that statistic of who's doing it and who's the target, I do want to bring something up before we move into, like solutions, approaches, directions, whatever you want to call it. I do think bullying is gender neutral, meaning because I've experienced it, right? And I had as many, and perhaps even more so, women bullying me or bullying others as men, right? And it's like, yes, I read that statistics because yes, it's probably still more prominent, but I think what I love about you saying, okay, we need to find a policy is so we are not just becoming like females or women becoming like a default victim, because I do see it like no matter what gender or what preference.
Yeah. I think that is true, especially with our awareness of various different forms of sexuality and what some people are calling the them movement, which I think is a great movement. Me too. I love the fact that as a man, I've learned more about my male privilege. I think with our rising and necessary sensitivity to different types of ways of being in the world, that it's really important to look at the wider gamut of identities and to say like, oh, okay, this can come across in this way or that way. I agree with you. I disagree with you. We always agree to disagree. I found from my experience that, and from the statistics, that women are much more, experience bullying much more than men, and men are usually the ones in power in organizations. I was pointed out, I had this conversation with someone this week, and they were like, well, your male privilege is at play when you think about bullying. I was like, thank you for telling me that. It was an uncomfortable truth. I was real easy with hearing it. I trusted the person who told me, and I was like, well, thank you. So, and at the same time, Isabella, I would also say the policy helps everyone to understand if their work style is bullying, if they're bullying. And a big part of it is targeting and intent. So I would also say like work style is different from bullying. If you're targeting someone intentionally, that's not a style. That's you saying, I'm going to make Julie or Mary or Susie or Jay or Isabella feel uncomfortable. So that, I feel like that's a huge difference. Yeah.
No, I love that distinction there. Mm-hmm. It's like this conscious
effort.
Intention.
Yeah.
Right? Not in a matter of stress, because we all also have the choice and the option and the power that when something comes out, to go back to that person and apologize.
Exactly.
Right? And say, it's like, oh my Lord, it's like, what the hell?
Yes.
And,
yeah.
I mean, it is. Again, I hold myself accountable. It's like, take a look in the mirror, everyone, and we'll all come up with certain scenarios where we're like, as well as on, yes, I did speak up when I saw it, but truth be told, after what then happened to me, I stopped it.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to burn myself. So
exactly.
Like, because like we're on this now, so how do we call it out? How do we solve it, right? How do I not stop saying something or speaking up when I see it, let alone like when it's happening to me, right? Yes, we talked about policies, and hopefully there would be a federal law that it's not just, I'm in Colorado and I lose, but I could go to an overarching, legal body to bring forward my issues. But what besides policies, like, can we do to hold people like that more accountable? And here's the thing, not to start a frenzy and suddenly just because someone said something, apologized, and is still going to be reported. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a tough one. It's such a fine line.
Yes, I think, policy is one thing. Again, I would say go to SHRM. They literally have a template where you can just place in your organization's name. The other thing I would say is more largely than bullying, any toxic workplace behavior, build accountability into your structure so that, let's say, when people are hired, when they're onboarded, talk about bullying and other toxic workplace behaviors, give them some type of training around it so that you can point to something to hold them accountable. Have a definition, put it on your intranet, put it in the onboarding manual, post it in your culture offices or in your break rooms so that it's visible to everyone. And then as a manager is promoted in the structure, with every promotion, have some training or conversation, online training, tell them to go to london.com or whatever you use and say, every manager is required to take this training. Another thing that I think is great to do to build in accountability in the structure is, because bullying is about power, you can create a system where managers by default early on ask for the feedback. So two things I think are super powerful. A lot of organizations have managers have that 90-day window for someone who's promoted. So within that 90 days, let them know, we're going to do a 360. That's just happening. Or we're going to gather, however you're going to gather the data about what you're doing. If I'm a leader and I know on the first day of my leadership that you're going to be asking my team how I'm doing, I'm less likely to use those bullying tactics because I know within the first 90 days, I'm going to be assessed. And then I would tie that to, if I were the HR team, and I'm not an HR law person, so I don't know if this is law or not. So someone else chime in. I would tie that to your effectiveness or ability to keep that management role. So if I keep it within that first 90 days and I get the data early before you establish your power as the bully, then I can get the information. The other thing you can do is have the managers in their one-on-ones ask, what behavior am I exhibiting that is unhealthy for you or unhelpful? How should I change? So I would say, to take the onus off the bully and to build the accountability into the structure, I would have bullying training definitions, reporting on many different levels. So in the onboarding, have the definition and the training. When a manager is promoted, have the definition of or the training. Require them to complete some types of online training. Have that 360 or some collection of data when they first enter their management position, so you can get the data before the direct reports feel intimidated. The other thing that I think is great, and I'm just going to riff a bit more, Isabella.
Sure, go ahead.
An outsider, someone who has no skin in the game. I've worked with a lot of organizations. You saw the names: Google, Adobe, worked with a lot of organizations. What's great about me approaching leaders is that I don't have any skin in the game. I'm not involved in any of the politics. I'm there to do 2 or 3 things. So a consultant who is a trained mediator, who has done this across organizations, can come in and say the unpopular things in ways that leaders can hear. There's a huge difference between a team member taking a huge leap and possibly being retaliated against to say, I don't like it that you're yelling at me. I can come into organizations and say, hey, I've looked at your predictive index profile. I have looked at the 360 information. I've talked to 12 employees. What I see is this. This looks like intimidating behavior, and then I can hold them accountable, or an outsider can say those things, hold their leader accountable, and then go home. So I feel like that's a huge asset to hire a trainer, not as a nice to have, or to hire a coach, not as a nice to have, to hire them because they're immune to the politics. And in theory, they can come in and they have skills enough to say challenging things, and they can hold leaders accountable.
And I love that. And here is also why, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something, or not just hire someone to tick a box, right? And it's like,
Yes.
oh, look at us as a company. We now hired a coach, right? Or
Yes,
a consultant.
exactly. Yeah.
And yet it will take a company to really be willing to do the uncomfortable work, right?
Exactly.
The uncomfortable analysis it takes, because it could also mean working on past issues, right? Because again, we just can't put, sweep them under the rug again, because it will always linger there. Yeah. And with all you said, what came into my mind is, funnily enough, right, going back to those, finger quote, soft skills.
Yes.
To speak up, no matter what, if it's bullying or just standing up for your beliefs, it takes a whole lot of courage.
It does. And risk. Yeah.
Trust, right? Like, yes, I trust perhaps not my supervisor who might be the bully, but like his boss or HR or an ethics line or, ethics officer or whatever a company might have. I have the trust to go there. And quite frankly, when I talk to many people, the trust is not there. So what would be like one action? Let's say HR as a, who should be like an independent somewhat body, right? We know the pull there, but let's just go with that for a moment. What could be that one action to build that trust, and not just lip service, but true trust?
So I'm going to give you, since you've asked for one, I'm going to give you 3.
Oh, great.
HR can be a technical profession. HR, and until this rise of culture and culture fit and culture ad, and which probably was motivated a lot by what happened in the Silicon Valley and those kind of more liberal, great cultures, a lot of people are now focused on culture. It would be interesting for you and your organization to ask to get some information about the work styles of your HR team, and to see, are these team members more technically focused? Are they analyzers and controllers? Or are they more soft skills and people's focused? Are they more promoters and persuaders? doesn't mean anything about your team. That will show that maybe you have a gap in the type of work style that can help develop that trust, because some people are introverts and they want to work alone. And HR teams, they have people who are introverts, and some people are extroverts and they're out there with the people. Developing trust, part of that is being out in the hoi polloi with the people, understanding what's going on, keeping a finger to the pulse. Because HR managers can have a caseload of an upward of 150 team members each in the US, they may not have the time to be out and about with the people. So one thing is that you need kind of a liaison to be connected to the culture. And that may not, and this is not a judgment, that may not be the function of an HR team in an organization when they have benefits and trainings and promotions and all of these other things to do that keep the organization running. So that's one thing. And another part is really developing your culture of trust. So that means you really want to think about bringing those core values down from the wall and making them active in the culture. So what does that mean when you say respect? What does that mean in terms of actions and holding people accountable? And again, I think once people feel empowered and see protections around reporting this type of behavior, then they're more likely to do it. I have mediated hundreds of conversations in organizations, and I hear constantly, HR is here to protect the organization. HR is here to protect the organization. And I'm just going to get a little granular, Isabella, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So what I see is there's a clear set of kind of things HR is going to do when they get a report of toxic behavior. So it might be, for example, first they ask the person experiencing the toxic behavior to have the conversation directly. Second, they ask the person to issue a formal report. Third, they have a mediation between the victim and the perpetrator. Fourth, they get training for the perpetrator to help them be better. And then there's some other sets of things. If that timeline is knowable to everyone, then it won't catch anyone by surprise. So what I've seen is that on the one hand, the HR professionals have all of the knowledge about the timeline and what the steps are. And on the other hand, the victim doesn't have any knowledge of that. If you post that timeline, put it in your handbook, and let everyone know that this is the timeline and these are the steps we follow, then there's trust. Because, and what happens often, and I have seen this many times in conversations, being on both sides of the mediation, is that in step 4, for example, the HR team will hire a coach for the perpetrator, not because they're protecting them, but because part of what HR does is to help everyone be better at work. And a part of their process might be, before we exit this person, we want to give them the training to be a better leader because we see we haven't gotten that. Remember, only 20% of those managers receive training. When they hire this coach, on the HR side, what they feel like is, we're supporting every team member, including someone who's made a mistake. However damaging it is a really damaging mistake to bully. It can still be a mistake if you're not trained. And then the victim feels like, HR is protecting this person because they should just fire them because I've been bullied. So it's this weird lack of information. More information and transparency about what the steps are, having it posted everywhere in the handbook before even everyone gets started, will create that level of trust. So everyone knows why HR hired a coach instead of just firing that person. Why HR asked you to talk to the person first instead of going in with a blind accusation with no witnesses. So it's a really interesting communication gap. Not blaming the victim, just having seen it. What are your thoughts?
So wow, oh my God, that was a lot, right? A lot of really good, not just direction, but solutions. But it'll also take quite a lot of work and commitment, serious commitment.
Yes.
Because it's not, planning a team building event, right, and having a fun activity is probably much nicer to plan. It's
Doesn't do the job though. Doesn't, as a trainer, I love those events. Doesn't do the trick.
Oh my goodness, have I been saying that or what? It's like, and here's the thing, just inviting someone to give a 3-day workshop on it or having a keynote speaker in, no matter how great they are, not just like, nothing against those folks.
Yes.
But if you do not change the day-to-day behavior, right? Like that are in the policies, that live in the processes, that lives in like how you engage with each other, then nothing will change.
Yes.
No matter whether you pay 50,000, right, for the best keynote speaker on that topic, right? I mean, it really takes structural work, like foundational work, to put those like courage, trust pillars in place, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there is an interesting movement 10 to 15 years ago where a lot of organizations adopted a no asshole policy. Excuse my French, but that is literally what.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, you can just type in no asshole policy, because there is still a different version of that movement to say, we don't allow any assholes. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time. He gave a talk that became seminal, and he said, fire your most productive individual contributor if they're an asshole. Fire them. I think there's a lot of other steps before that. And at the same time, I think it's great to say, doesn't matter what you are contributing in terms of ROI or bottom line. If you're toxic to the team, you have to change or grow in some way, or you have to go somewhere else. So yeah, Elizabeth, I think so there's a movement.
Well, and let's do our piece and our part in pushing that movement forward, because it's bad enough that we see it's still happening in childhood and the disastrous outcomes, right, and loss of lives we've seen. I mean, as adults, we should be so much wiser. We should be so much better than that. But let me ask you this: what would you tell? Like, what piece of advice would you give a target? And let's call it like a victim in this case, right? Because something is done against a person. So what would be your advice?
Well, a person who has been a target of bullying and a reformed but former bully, I would say a couple of things. One, first of all, find someone in the organization who can help you advocate for yourself. Very few people have a direct communication style. That's why we have conversations about radical candor, because few people, for lots of reasons, feel justifiably uncomfortable just going to the bully and saying, hey, that thing you did last week. So I would say there's a couple of things you can do. You can start a process by giving some feedback to someone in the organization. You can start the process by maybe a colleague who is more direct. One thing you can do is say, Johnny, you're in the meetings with me and the person who I feel like is bullying me. Can you observe over these meetings and then give them the feedback about their behavior without mentioning my name? So that's another good place to go. Another thing to do is to ask HR about what the process is and to see how comfortable you feel with going through that process. It is really a complicated phenomenon because, unfortunately, the person in the bullying situation who has the most valuable information, the most quote unquote evidence, is the target. And for good reason, the target fears retaliation because bullying is in large part a power dynamic and intimidation tactic. So finding other avenues to give the information is really important. So again, I would say get the steps from the HR professional, find an advocate in the organization who can observe the bully's behavior and give them feedback without mentioning you, and then assess your readiness. So you can see the steps and say, I had a coaching session with someone in a tech firm, and we saw that they were a victim of toxic behavior. And we looked at the life situation, like there was some family stuff. And you have the right to say, I do know that it would be very helpful as a target for me to say and do these things. Because of my life situation right now, this is not the time for me to do that. So I would also tell targets to not give away your power by saying there's nothing I can do. Fortunately, in the US, there are lots of things we can do. We also, I do know that there are many reasons why, justifiably so, you would not take those actions. So I would separate readiness to take steps from this idea that there's nothing to do. And then even call an outside consultant for a 10 to 15 minute consultation and to get some feedback and to really go through that thing and say, what are some things I can do? What am I ready to do? What are some other advocates in the organization that I can look towards? And all of that is a lot before you have to quit or you have to address a bully directly. I think there's a lot of other avenues, looking for many other avenues to give the feedback and to start a type of process.
Yes, and for everyone who witnesses it, speak up.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there's just nothing else to say. And I mean, we've seen it with so many movements that, yes, unfortunately, a certain movement wasn't ripe in, perhaps 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yes, and sometimes that feels like a bit of a gut punch. Mm-hmm. But if we keep on thinking that way, movements will never start, right?
Yes.
And it's the same old saying, right? You just have to be sometimes in the right place at the right time, as hard as it is. But like being quiet about it, being silent about it, surely doesn't help. So, I mean, the only ism I have on this topic, because there isn't really nothing witty, because it is such a brutal topic with so much impact and hurt. But the only ism I have is like, don't be a bully, be a human.
Yes.
Right? Where just stop. It's not helping you. It's not helping anyone else. So, wow, this was brilliant. Thank you so much, Jay. And for everyone out there, like if you want to connect with Jay on LinkedIn, his profile is listed as James Guilford, Guilford. And you can also reach him via email at jay@coworkslead.com. I mean, Jay, thank you so much for like coming on the show and having this really, really frank and somewhat also uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, former bully. I know a lot about it. So, thanks for having me, Izzy. And we'll probably double back, hopefully, to talk more about how great anti-bullying laws have become.
And I certainly believe I see a part 2 coming, so everyone else stay tuned. I think there will be a loads more about this topic. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening to The Bull, The China Shop and I, with yours truly, Isabella Izzy Tsatse. If you like our show and want to know more about the podcast and me, myself, and I, please check out www.thebulllthechinashopandi, all one word, .com, and leave us a review on the platform of your choice. Oh, and if you have any uncomfortable truths ready to be exposed, let us know. We want to hear from you. Always remember this Izzyism. Your uncomfortable truths are the foundation of permanent revolution.